Hey, everybody, this is Jake Wynn, public historian, back again for another discussion about a new episode of Masters of the Air. I am joined by my co hosts on this series, Justin Voigthofer, who's a public historian with the Gettysburg Foundation. We are joined for this episode by Ryan Quint, good friend of Justin and I, and also a public historian who works for the National Park Service. He's also an author of Determined to Stand and Fight, the Battle of Monocacy, July 9th, 1864, about that Civil War battle, and is the author of an upcoming book about the Battle of Drainesville, also another Civil War battle that took place in 1861. How are you gents doing?
Pretty good, Jake. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, doing well, doing well.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for being here. And this evening, we're going to discuss the third episode of Masters of the Air, the Apple TV Plus mini series about the 8th Air Force, specifically the 100th Bomb Group within the 8th Air Force in the Second World War. We're going to, just like our first two episodes, we're going to blast through a quick recap, and then we're going to get to some reactions and reviews of this third episode and talk a little bit about the history behind this series as well. So diving into that recap, this is an episode we've been waiting for really since the series started. We've talked about it, I think, in each of the episodes that we've done previously, and that is the infamous mission to Regensburg, Germany, that took place in August of 1943, known as the Schweinfurt-Regensburg Raid, for reasons we'll get to in just a second. We see in this episode a mission briefing kind of in detail. We see the officers all march in, talk about the raid that they're going to do, the unveiling of the map of where this raid is going to go to, and a very long arrow extending all the way from England over occupied Europe through Germany and then south over the Mediterranean to North Africa and American and Allied occupied North Africa. It's going to be one of the longest raids up to this point that's going to be carried out by airplanes of the 8th Air Force. And this was a trick play being run by the 8th. This is a new technique that they are going to try where they're going to launch multiple hundreds of aircraft in multiple groups and sending them in different places. So one raid is going to go to Regensburg. That's what we see in this episode. That's where the 100th Bomb Group goes to bomb a Messerschmitt aircraft factory. We also see a raid on Schweinfurt, Germany. Another section of the 8th is going to go there to bomb a ball bearings factory. This was meant to be timed perfectly to confuse the German defenders. And what we see immediately is the weather of England wreaking havoc, as it often did during the Second World War with missions. And that is going to delay. Ultimately, it's going to ruin the timing of this raid and mean that the initial raiders, who we see in this episode going to Regensburg, are going to go in alone, and the trick play aspect of this is going to come apart. And each of these units that is going to go, we don't see the Schweinfurt raiders, but they are going to be chewed up as well. And the entirety of this mission's kind of the building blocks of this mission, that it was going to be a surprise, it's going to confuse the defenders, goes away and leaves each element. It's going to be undergoing what we see in this episode: vicious attacks by both flak from the ground and from fighter aircraft in the skies. We see a ton of combat in this episode, and combat that is really the kind of the shining aspect of this episode, because in its horror, in its terror, we see the realities of air combat in the Second World War in full display. The planes flying apart, fighters flying within groups. It is a mess. It is a maelstrom, and it went on for hours for these men going through. We see it in less than an hour-long episode, but these men endured this for hours upon end, going over occupied Europe and then through Germany and on their way towards bombing their target at Regensburg. We see the loss of several characters in this episode as well. Most importantly, we see the loss of Kurt Biddick, who we've seen through the first three episodes. He is going to lose his life in a crash as a result of enemy fire taking out his B-17. And then we see successful raid at Regensburg. And then these aircraft are going to keep on moving, barely making it to North Africa, having enough fuel, and damaged aircraft making it in just in time, sometimes coming in with no engines at all. And so we see them landing in North Africa, and that is where this episode comes to an end, with beautiful sunset scenes over the African continent, as the 8th Air Force has made this mission successfully. These surviving aircraft land in North Africa and live to fight another day. So that is a somewhat brief recap of the episode. Justin, what did you think about episode 3 of Masters of the Air?
Yeah, I just 3 words that I wrote down: tragic, tragic, costly, and awful. That I think you get a good sense that they lost 10, I think, B-17s in the 100th, out of the ones that took off, and you got to think there's 10 in each B-17. Now, some of them, the chutes were short, so they float down over Germany, and we kind of saw, and that's one of the things I think you guys are going to talk about. I'm not going to steal in your guys' material, but we saw somebody land in Belgium and then get picked up by the resistance and then be offered, hey, do you want to try to escape, or are you going to try to surrender? I don't even know the name of the character, which maybe is on me, but that goes to something I think we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But anyway, you see the impact, and this is there for the 100th. If I looking ahead, this is one of the 2 big days in their history. The next one we're probably going to be coming up very shortly as a raid on Munster, Germany. But this is one of the 2 that is going to define both the 100th and the 8th Air Force, and what it takes to fight, or what they went through in World War II. Because Jake, you mentioned it, the other group that we don't really see in total lost around 60 planes, and that's 600 KIA in just one day from the 8th Air Force during this mission. So, out of all the episodes we've had so far, this is the first one that feels kind of rushed, right? You go right into the briefing, then you go up in the plane, and then you're there the whole time. There is no really background. You see in the soup, as they talk about the fog, they're kind of waiting for the mission to go. But other than that, they really don't have, there's no background. There's no, just other than the mission briefing, hey, let's go ahead. Which, if you read Harry Crosby's memoir, this was something they trained up for a while. This wasn't a just normal mission that they did it. Crosby in real life was actually pulled off the line, not flying, and they trained up for a long time before this mission, where this episode, you don't really get a sense of that. Crosby seems like he's one of the guys getting the mission briefing for the first time. So kind of lessens the importance of it, or lessens the background into the episode. But we write show sheets before. I saw what you guys wrote, so I'm gonna let you handle it. You guys have a lot of good points coming up. So Ryan, what did you think the episode coming in?
Yeah, so I'll admit that I don't know a whole lot about World War II, so I'm kind of like I'm learning about this stuff as the episode unfolds, which is cool, right? Because there's a suspension of disbelief, because I don't know what's going to happen, and I think what the show does really well is it shows the terror and the claustrophobia of air combat in World War II. There is nowhere to hide, right? The series successors of Band and Brothers in the Pacific, right? Easy Company could hide in foxholes and they could dig for cover. The 100 bomb group couldn't do that. They were in a big can, thousands of feet in the sky, and there's nowhere to hide. And so I think the show does a really good job of showing that. And again, as Jake was saying, the fact that almost the entire episode was just the terror above Germany. I think the show did a good job of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Jake, with you, I know that you have a lot of thoughts on it. So give us your initial thoughts. Give us what you thought of the whole thing.
Yeah, I went back and rewatched this a second time. I will admit, the first time I watched this, I was a little underwhelmed in terms of the episode when viewed in totality, and also with the first 2 episodes in mind. What I really liked about this episode, and what this show does incredibly well, is the CGI, is the combat scenes, is making this feel real, giving us, as living 80 years after these events take place, giving us an opportunity to see the reality of aerial combat in the Second World War, to see the air war up close. Another thing I went back and did recently is go back and watch the documentary Memphis Belle, about made by William Wyler during the Second World War, and footage shot during these missions over Europe. And it is amazing to see things that they couldn't show with with the film equipment at the time. And just the a lot of the real actiony pieces of this, you get to see just the scale of the combat, and I think that this show does that incredibly well, showing what it was like to experience the air war. However, I am struggling with the show a little bit at this point, and a little concerned for where it's going in terms of our lack of character development. We really don't get to see these characters, outside of the aircraft, and that's okay. Listening to show writers and people who put this together, that's really the focus is their experience in the air, and that's okay. That makes sense. We want to see what they went through. However, when it comes to caring about these characters, we need to know something about them. We need to know where they came from. We need to know a little bit about what they're fighting for, if anything, or if they're not fighting for anything at all and they're just there for adventure, just to build that out a little bit, to feel a little bit about who these men are. And they're trying really hard to show us the bond between them, but we need to know a little bit more about them to really get a sense of those bonds, how they are forged, how these men's relationships evolve and change over time. And, we're only on episode 3. There's still a lot of ground to cover in this series, unlike where Band of Brothers, when we were all kids when that came out, and we we're watching it back and able to watch it on a DVD version in rapid succession. We're watching this kind of play out in real time. But my concern is that we're losing our focus here. Now we're going to start to see, as we look at the trailer for episode 4, we're going to see the escape of our guy who's landed in Belgium. Now he's going to try to be an escapee and get back to England, which was a very real experience for airmen during the Second World War, for Americans trying to get back to England. But we're going to focus on him a little bit now, and we know that there's going to be some POW scenes and POW camps, and we're going to roll in the Tuskegee Airmen too. And what I'm concerned a little bit about is we're going to lose focus and kind of be all over the place and not get a real sense of the full rounded experience of what of the bonds between these men. We're kind of being rapidly moved around, and the story is not being allowed to kind of play out itself. It's just kind of like rapid fire here, there, everywhere. You're not really sure what's going on, who people are. But that's just some of my concerns. I'm hoping, and going back and watching the second time through, I'm like, okay, like, get to know these characters a little bit better. Try to focus in on things maybe I missed the first time through. But those are just some of my observations. I know that's probably not going to be a super popular opinion. Reading comment boards elsewhere, people really love this episode, and I think there are a lot of reasons to like the third episode in terms of the combat that they show and the realities of this war experience for these men that lived through it. But I think that it's okay to take a bigger picture and say, where does this stack up in terms of other miniseries, a Band of Brothers or Pacific, and just have a little bit of concern about, are they really doing some justice to these individual men's stories, and maybe in the service of trying to tell the 100th Bomb Group story, missing out on these individual pieces. But I don't know. Do you guys have any responses to that or thoughts about that?
Well, the one thing I would say too is that I agree with you a lot. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate on the other side too. The thing we have to realize is Band of Brothers is one company, one infantry company that's going to be roughly 100 guys, maybe a little bit less, right? And by the time the war goes on, they don't focus on all 100. You keep the same 5, 6, 7 guys as you see throughout the war. 100th Bomb Group is a lot bigger. There's a lot more people. There's a lot more moving parts. So it's kind of hard to compare 100th Bomb Group to Band of Brothers because it's two different organizations and kind of different on the scale structure. But other than I agree with you. That's the only thing I can think of, is that just they're trying to condense many more accounts into kind of a smaller time frame, as opposed to focusing on maybe a plane or just one small little group there too. But Ryan, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I'll just reiterate the two of you said. And then the thing I'd add is that we've all been around pieces of film or TV shows and been like, oh, well, they didn't really get this right or this right. What the shows do is convince people to go do more research on their own, read the book Masters of the Air, or in this case, go to the 8th Air Force Museum in Georgia, which is one of the best museums I've ever been to. And I say that as someone who doesn't really enjoy museums all that much. I spent the better part of an afternoon in that museum. And so if the show convinces people to do that, to get out and get involved, then the show is doing its job, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Ryan. And I think voice is something Justin and I have alluded to, but never explicitly said, which is if we're talking about the source material of this book, go read them. Go
Yeah.
read the source material. Go look at the I think it's the American Air Museum in Britain. They have like an incredible archive of photographs of just all kinds of things about all of these air crews, histories of the aircraft themselves. That are really remarkable. The one of the amazing things about this part of the war is that it was so well documented. They did an amazing job of telling all of these men's stories, in part because they weren't in the trenches, they weren't in the foxholes. They're coming back to their bases. They're able to write about their experiences, take lots of photographs, share their experiences, and we're all benefiting from that with this series and all of the books and memoirs that have been written based on that source material. So, you guys okay with pivoting to talking about some of the history behind this episode?
Of course. Yeah.
All right. So, a little bit more about the this particular Regensburg-Schweinfurt raid. Like we mentioned, it is kind of a trick play. As Justin mentioned, it was something that was held in highest secrecy. There's training going involved. This wasn't an ad hoc mission. This is something that had been planned out for weeks and months, but it is a disaster. It does not go as planned. Ultimately, the 8th loses 60 planes during the mission, almost 600 men lost. That's killed in action or taken prisoner. The successful part of the raid was actually what we see. The Regensburg raid was the more successful of the two. The Messerschmitt factory was pretty well plastered by this raid. The bombing was pretty accurate, but this also is going to inspire this deep raid into Germany. It's going to inspire the German war industry to the leaders there to disperse their factories because centralized factories were easily targeted, easily destroyed. If you disperse those factories, build in cities and towns all over, and it makes it harder to target those individual factories and those pieces. So this ends up having kind of a really negative aspect in terms of the Germans are going to start to move their factories, build components of the Me-109s in different places, and then bring them together ultimately. So that's one element of this. The Schweinfurt raid does not go well at all. And the effort to destroy German ball bearing factories does not work. They try it repeatedly throughout the war, and it does not ever work. And we see that strategy kind of evolve. I'm sure we're going to later on see some other strategies that are going to come into play, like targeting German oil production, targeting German fighters, and specifically their pilots and trying to kill them. So this is part of that. We're not seeing them talk about this, discuss this, the kind of strategy behind this. That's a little bit of what's going on. And just one other final piece, I know as we're running out of time here. I think that the scene that I was most looking for was included in this episode, and that is the account of Harry Crosby, the navigator that we've seen through the first 2 episodes, and see him pretty prominent in this episode. Writes a memoir that we've talked about a lot. And we see him in the middle of the episode as he's on his machine gun firing. All of a sudden, things slow down, and he looks out the window and he sees just the scale of the carnage outside as pieces of planes, pieces of bodies, explosions. All of this is taking place. I just want to read a bit of Crosby's description of this from his memoir. You'll see the inspiration for this particular scene, including, I think, one of the worst aspects of this episode, one of the visuals that we see. This is what he writes. He says, quote, "As other planes were hit, we had to fly through their debris. I instinctively ducked as we almost hit an escape hatch from a plane ahead. When a plane blew up, we saw their parts all over the sky. We smashed into some of the pieces. One plane hit a body which tumbled out of a plane ahead, an unusual hit. In a plane ahead, all 4 engines got smacked at once, all burst into flames, and then the whole plane exploded. No chutes," I wrote. That's the scene I think that most moved me through this episode, as well as the ball turret gunner who doesn't get out of his ball turret before his B-17 explodes. But what do you guys think in terms of anything that I mentioned there, or any of the history that behind this episode?
Well, the one thing I'd like to point out is that the thing you said at the end, and Crosby makes, he is writing no shoots. He's writing. You see in the episode, he talks about, hey, when did Biggs' plane go down? And he's asking the bombardier to try to give him a time, because for once they get back to ground, that's going to be the only record that they know whatever happened to that plane. There's no GPS on it. There's no there's no black box. They're not able to find it and figure out, okay, this is so and so's plane. Crosby is holding the only record that their families would ever get to know of what happened to his friends, what happened to their relatives over top of Germany. So he's very particular. We see that in this episode too, which I think is a good touch to show, hey, he is responsible when he is writing in his logbook basically what's going to be the explanation that family carries with them for the rest of their life, and passes that on for generations too. So I like that they included that in there, and kind of showed Crosby's insistence that he get it right, because I think he understands why that is so important. But Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think that was a really emotional scene and powerful scene for sure. It just kind of encourages me to go read Crosby's memoir, which I've never done. So,
yeah, it's a good one. And I think we'll segue that into Crosby's memoir is going to be great for not just this episodes 4, but episodes that you've already seen too, Ryan. So what do you think of the series so far? And then kind of where would you like to see it end at the end of the 9 episodes or 10 episodes, however many it is? Where would you like to say, okay, yeah, this is where I hope it takes us?
So I think, really enjoy seeing the veterans interviews. I really hope at the end of the whole thing, they have some snippet of an interview. Because I think that was really powerful with Band of Brothers in the Pacific was, yeah, the dramatization, but also veteran interviews. And I thought that was a really powerful way to end those 2 series. And so, the war is over. That's great. Let's hear these guys in their old age kind of reminiscing on their past experiences.
Yeah. And I think that we have, I think my favorite character that I've read so far about Rosie Rosenthal is going to be coming up here very soon. And I hope that we get to see the rest of the war through his eyes, because he's a pretty amazing character and goes on to do some pretty important things immediately following the war, which I hope that they cover as well too. But yeah, Jake, anything else you'd like to add before we kind of wrap it up here?
No. I think that I think I said my piece. And we'll see how this develops. I have a lot of hope for the series going forward. I have some concerns about, some things. I hope we see some more character development for these guys, get to know them a little bit more. But overall, I hope I kind of echo Ryan's wish that we get to see some real footage of these guys or hear their voices, because there are a lot of great interviews out there with these guys, and to hear it in their own words, I think that would be pretty powerful as well.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we are just about out of time here. So want to say a huge thank you to Ryan Quint for joining us. We really appreciate you jumping on and talking about the show and your experience watching this with a little bit of an outsider's perspective. The Civil War historian reacts to Masters of the Air. We really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Justin, thank you as always for being the excellent co-host here. And thank you all out there for watching this. If you have any comments, please let us know in the comments section. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on Masters of the Air. We'd also give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channels wherever you're finding this video. And we hope that you'll tune in for our next recap. Our plan is to do this for each of the episodes, and maybe even a recap of the whole thing afterwards. So thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch you next time.